with a patient, a delivery case. A mother had given birth to a newborn, and then there was a problem with her placenta separation, and it had been 3 days. And nothing had happened, and there was no breastfeeding, nothing. And when I went and gave essential medical care, she became all right, and everything was normal after I treated her. So today I'm very glad to see that little baby has grown up, and mother and child both are happy. And so it gives me immense satisfaction and pleasure to see that.
Sunita Tamang and Nirmala Lamichani, who still work as nurses for Community Action in Nepal. Well, now we meet the British man who can't stop starting new businesses, many of them in areas where conventional investors won't go. Richard Spinks started his business career as a teenager in a small town in the south of the UK. He went on to use his talent for making money and gift for learning languages to set up a series of successful companies around the world. He's recently been forced out of his home in Ukraine by the fighting in the east of the country. Richard's latest venture is a deal with the indigenous people of Alberta in Canada to help them make money from their rich natural resources. He told me how his business career began at an early age.
I used to wash cars at the Barnes Golf Club. That was my first job. And we actually didn't do bad because we charged a tenner a car. And it was across the street from the house. And after that, I set up a stall in Dartford Market, and I was buying bedding plants and selling them on. My friend and I had a company called Bill and Ben the Flower Pot Men. Not very creative, but we'd sell out by 12 o'clock every Saturday.
Right.
Yeah.
So you were good at business even then.
Yeah.
And you've done so many different start-up businesnesses, haven't you? You've started businesses in almost every field you could imagine. Can you give me a brief list of some of the ones you started in those days?
Yeah, I mean, the important thing to note is that I knew nothing about any of them. The reason I've done so many is I've been willing to go into businesses that I didn't quite understand. So I built, for example, one of the largest fish businesses in the former Soviet Union, out of Murmansk or Hangulsk.
And how did you start that?
So a friend of mine asked me to help him because I had the language ability, but none of the skills required, and other than being able to get on with people and negotiate with them.
And what was the business model?
I'd buy fish for the business in Russia and actually pay fishermen for those fish, which caused a lot of problems. But
Caused problems because
no one else would pay for it. They just threaten and extort the fish. And I turned up and not realising this was how it was done.
Rather naive of you, thinking that you might have to buy it.
Yeah, and paid for them, and then eventually changed the whole way that fish trading was done in Russia, or at least certainly in the Arctic. And we'd bring it back to our factories, which I'd rent in Poland before it joined the EU, but whilst it still had the export licenses, so we could actually do cheap processing in Poland of cheap fish out of Russia, and then we'd sell finished products into the UK.
And thereby make a profit.
A lot of profit, actually, on the fish at that time, yeah.
So that became quite a big business.
Yeah, very big. I think the last month I was there before I left and the threats got too bad, I think we shipped 10,000 tonnes into the UK.
And then you had another business at one time putting pool tables and jukeboxes into premises in Poland, didn't you?
Yeah, I went to a football match with one of my clients, and this was in 1988. Would you come with me because no one speaks English? And I think you're a nice guy to spend a week with, and I'll pay. So I went, I'll come. And we realised really quickly that every evening we tried to go out somewhere for a beer and there was nowhere to go. And all there were these cafes with overstaffed cafes with no people that were closed at lunchtime because they're people too and they've got to eat, right? And I realised there was an opportunity here to rent the floor space and do something with it. So what I did for that week was I rented 11 downtown central Warsaw cafes and then went back and thought, what am I going to do then? Went back and bought pool tables. And I brought 66 pool tables into Poland, which started in 1989, just as communism ended. And I sold it 2 years later with queues around the block to the guys who sold me the pool tables from the UK in the first place.
Right. So what's the motivation for you in getting into a business? Is it simply money, or is it the challenge?
Money's the least of it, I think. I do things I enjoy with people I want to do it with. But I also like now to do things that make change for the communities in which I work. I mean, I live now back in the west of Ukraine, where I built Europe's largest agricultural business at the time.
Well, I want to ask you about that. So tell me about the idea behind that agricultural business. How does it work?
Well, there was no idea. I mean, I built a house leaving the fish business because of all these death threats I was getting, and I thought, I'm going to take the family to Ukraine. It's safer.
And your wife is Ukrainian?
Yeah. So we have 3 kids there. And I decided to build a house close to the Polish border in Ukraine. And I had no thoughts at all about agriculture, and nor any experience. And some friends came over to the housewarming and said, what a nice house, who owns the field at the back? I said, I don't really know. And one of them said, I've been doing some research. best place in the world to grow rapeseed. So he said, why don't we find out about the field? So I asked the mayor, and there was 110 people owned it. It was 100 hectares. They all owned a little tiny sliver, so it was absolutely uninvestable and useless to anyone. They had no money to farm it themselves, so weeds were up to your chest. And I just spoke to the mayor and said, can I please rent it? And she said, we have to sign a lease agreement with all 110 people. And then I ended up leasing it. And then I thought, oh, this is really good. I'm going to keep going, because I do. That's the kind of guy I am, you see. I ended up with 126,000 hectares.
And how big did the business get?
$500 million in 2 years, and 2.5 years.
Wow.
From scratch.
And was there any sense in which you were exploiting those landowners, those small landowners?
No, totally on the contrary. If you went there today, you couldn't imagine what it was like when I arrived. They had an asset that, on its own, and a small sliver was worthless to them. So what I did was I went in, I paid in advance, I paid them rent, and then I also paid their land tax for them. So I removed that headache. But not only that, I gave them jobs to work on the reconsolidated lands. And in the end, we employed indirectly over 7,000 people in a region which had no employment. There was 96% unemployment when we arrived, and pretty much zero when we left, and today, actually. The place is a different place.
But then came the recent conflict. What effect did that have, first of all, on your business and then on you personally?
Well, I actually left the Lancome business in 2009 and moved to the east of the country. So I moved directly into the epicentre of what is now the conflict. But my house is now inaccessible.
What happened? Did armed men come to it and take it from you? Or
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
How did that happen? Can you explain? Were you there at the time?
No, I'd already left. We had 6 mortars came into the house 4 doors down, which is my friend's house, and that was destroyed. Mine's still standing and complete, actually, at the moment. And then we had 4 artillery shells hit our complex. Again, missing my house, fortunately, but there are other houses were destroyed. So it became serious, and we got out on the last train in June before the railway lines were blown up.
You've now done a deal with some indigenous people in Canada. How did that come about?
Well, we also, with our agricultural business in Western Ukraine, I understood that the people owned the land. And no, it wasn't valuable, and no, it wasn't usable. But I knew I could make it valuable for them and for my company, and make it usable and investable. But a gentleman who's the Grand Chief of British Columbia, who's called Ronald Derrickson, read about this in the Wall Street Journal. We saw the parallels between the indigenous people of Canada. Okay, they live in remote locations. They have limited access to education, same as in the west of Ukraine. And they had great assets that were uninvestable. And it's the same thing. Now,
What did you figure out in the end? What sort of business have you set up there?
First of all, they didn't want to talk to me at all. They just assumed that I was another white guy who was going to come in and abuse them. And since then, we built a relationship that's very strong. And the way I talk to them is I say, have you been to Dubai? Have you been to Saudi? And they say, have you been to Qatar? And they say, where's that? Some of them, well, no, but that's an Arab country, isn't it? And I say, yeah. I say, they're like you. They were like you in the 30s. They were walking around poor on barren land, knowing or not knowing that under their feet were huge riches, and did not know how to develop them or how to finance the development of this going forward. And you're in the same position. They have everything you can imagine in terms of resources. Some of the groups one of them, Treaty 8, for example, is larger than France. And it's full of wonderful resources that they could sensitively be using to improve their standard of living. And that's what I'm trying to help them do. And if, of course, our business can do well out of it with them in a fair and equitable way, that's what I want to do.
Richard, I want to go back to your motivation, because one of the other things that I notice about you is you keep moving on. You don't, you start things, you make a success of them, and then you move on. Is that because you're restless and because you relish a fresh challenge?
No, it's because I see opportunity where others don't, and I can't turn down an opportunity. You can't stop, because you never know what's going to happen. You never know when it can all fall apart behind you. But my ability's been to, and I've been broke as many times as I've had money, you see. There's always been to be able to do it again. And that gives you strength. Most people think they can't do it again, and they're afraid, and they become manipulated. They think that will never happen again, and that now they have to play safe. And as soon as they play safe, they lose what they have as entrepreneurs. And I'm confident that I can always do it again.
I was going to ask you about that, because there'll be people listening to this programme who are thinking of starting their own businesses. Do you have any advice to them?
Yeah, start your business now. Start. Doesn't matter if you don't know anything about it, to be honest. I didn't ever know anything about anything I ever did. but you learn over time. It's a pleasure when you're in a room with somebody that you find who knows so much more than you, and it's about using that and perhaps befriending those people and in a positive and non-cynical way, and trying to get them to come along with you. And if you can relate with them and get them engaged with you, they can be hugely beneficial. Most of the time, you'll find that other people don't necessarily know much more than you. They just like to pretend they do and charge you for it.
The serial entrepreneur Richard Spinks. Do keep in touch. We love to get your emails to outlook@bbc.com or to see your messages on our Facebook page. You're listening to Outlook.
It's not yet built, it's not yet
for Ukraine as a result of what it called saying he was a
but a little bit it gave me. This is actually your house.